After watching the final episode of Atlanta, I immediately began thinking of how else I can talk about this show. All the other videos I've made were in response to my own curiosities or gaps that I saw in theories being made by others. And this time around, nothing really jumped out at me, at least, nothing that hasn't already been touched on and touched all over. Of course, there's the was it all a dream question that the series leaves us with, which is on the outskirts of the wake up from a dream Deus Ex Machina solution, which we'll talk about later, but I can't make an entire video just about that. So I'm going to talk about Atlanta and what I thought about it. I don't really have a script, just like a list. And so there's going to be a little bit of theory and a little bit of analysis, but really it's just me talking about what I think. I know it's a little different. Come back for the more analysis and theory-based stuff next time. The world of Atlanta is difficult to get a grip on because of the way that it bridges surrealism, magical realism, and what I know as metaphysical fiction together. There are moments that are incredibly grounded in realism, and then there are those that are like completely fantastical. And then there are those that are like a bridging of both of them. Because of those sort of three categories, it makes Atlanta this city that is overly familiar while also making it like completely bizarre and unreachable and like something you'd never see anywhere else, but also like something that you would see everywhere, if that makes sense. For example, the first episode, which we're going to reference a lot, the first episode surrounds this all too real conflict that randomly takes place in a parking lot. Like they're chopping it up in the car, some guy comes and kicks the mirror, and now it's a conflict that ends in a life being taken. This moment completely juxtaposes the last moment of the series, which is sort of this euphoric, relieving thing, even though it's a cliffhanger, which, like I said, we'll talk about later. And this last moment makes it clear that all the fantastical elements of the show could have just been the culmination of this intense high and sensory deprivation chamber. This moment also mirrors the last moment in the first episode, where Van is staring in disbelief at the TV screen, which has just brought the news that Alan Earn got arrested. But even within the episode, there are these super surreal moments that prime us for a show that does something more than what we're used to, but puts it in a setting that is super familiar. Anything is possible. Those are the ethics of this show. In the very first episode, we see just how fast your future can change. There's also the fact that this episode fills in the blanks retroactively so that you experience the same deja vu that Darius experienced when he sees the dog at the beginning. So when that dog comes back while Earn is on the bus, we sort of experience that same deja vu, and then we experience it again when we see the conflict start toward the end of the episode. This sort of retroactive information filling, I'm sure there's an actual word for it, but I don't know it, continues to be planted throughout the rest of the series. Essentially, the show has like been telling on itself the entire time. Like, remember when Earn would wake up every season? In a way, that was priming us for the end of season 4, constantly introducing this possibility that the show could be taking place between the ears of someone on the main cast, even though it didn't end up being Earn necessarily. Though we don't learn the specifics, we find out a bit about Earn at Princeton, which makes it understandable why he never mentioned it to anyone and why it's this huge point of contention in that very first episode. The goof who sat by the door calls back to season 3 episode New Jazz and the season 1 VAN episode. The homeliest little horse mirrors the season 3 finale Terrare. Light-skinned fits with Alligator Man and Fubu really well. Andrew Wyeth Alfred's world is a lot like Woods. I think if you were to group these episodes by like ideas or like structures, like framing, you get an entirely different interpretation of those episodes, because these other episodes that have similar formats or framing or whatever can sort of provide closure for those other ones. My favorite part of Atlanta is how the main characters develop, and that's funny because that wasn't always my favorite part. That was actually my least favorite part at one time because while watching the show, specifically toward the beginning of season 3, I didn't feel like they were developing very much or very well. While there was no shortage of like dilemmas for them to navigate or like lessons for them to learn after dealing with a dilemma, it just didn't feel like they were very dynamic to me. And some of the friends I'd watched the show with said the same thing. Like, it didn't feel like actual tangible changes were happening. But when you go back and watch the first couple of episodes of season 1 with season 4 as a backdrop, you realize that these characters have sort of become exaggerated versions of themselves, except for Darius. But let's not jump ahead because I know I didn't explain that well. So let's start with Ern. In the first episode, Ern's father says that he's the type of person that's very determined to get what he wants, but on his own terms. So while he's the type of guy to let it slide that this man Dave, I hate Dave, is saying the N-word to further embellish his story, he's also the type to get back at him by making him tell the story in front of Alfred and Darius, under the fear of getting his ass whooped, and to pay KP directly, so to go over Dave's head instead of paying Dave. So he's getting back at Dave on his own terms, and they show you that from the first episode. And then in the 4th season, while working through his own trauma, including what happened to him at Princeton and as a child, he is revealed as kind of a sociopathic character and willing to pay teams of people to ruin the lives of others. This is so different from the Ern in season 1, who acts...
I just keep losing. I mean, some people just supposed to lose.
He's got money and a bit of power now, but he's still getting people back on his own terms. His own terms just happen to be a concentrated effort at ruining their lives. I also want to mention really quickly, the Princeton thing is connected to something that happened to Ern as a child at the hands of a male family member. I think it's interesting when you look back on season 1, because his father says Ern would tell Al what happened before he would tell his own father. Perhaps that has something to do with that family member being on his father's side of the family. As we saw in the episode from season 4, dealing with like his mother and his aunties and his Uncle Willie. Uncle Willie wasn't the one. Clearly, they're still on decent terms with Uncle Willie. So it was probably someone on his father's side of the family, which contributes to their dynamic as father and son. In the first episode, Alfred drops a lot of hints that we don't find out are hints until later. So first he says that Ern hasn't contacted him since his mother's funeral. This tells us that his mother's death really affected him, because the fact that Ern didn't contact him meant a lot. And it's also evident because she's essentially mentioned every season. We even see a version of her 2 times. What it also tells us is how close these two were at one point. This is especially clear in the second episode, like right at the beginning, when the two are being held and waiting for bail to be posted. Look at them, chopping it up. These niggas are having a great time. Same with the idea that Al didn't hesitate to bail Ern out, even though he wasn't able to do so. He didn't hesitate to sort of offer or to attempt to do it. So we know from episode 2, whatever happened to Ern at Princeton is a huge deal to him because he's not telling his favorite cousin about it. His anxieties about these two very important family members come to a head in the rain, where an apparition of this young version of his mother asks him if he owns his masters, and Ern reassures him that he does. In the episode Andrew Wyeth, Alfred's World, Alfred's reaction to Ern urging him to come back to Atlanta is much softer than it would have been in season 1 or even season 2. Their relationship is in an entirely different place now. They have this trust for one another, and even when one of them questions what the other is doing or questions the bond that they have and the validity and honesty of their relationship, the other reassures him and then they move on. And being able to do that is a beautiful thing. What doesn't change, but is subtly hinted at several times in the series, is Alfred's affection for Lottie, which is something that I really appreciate. Lottie becomes a real character in the 4th season, but prior to that, Alfred shows a lot of care for her and what she needs, beginning in that very first episode. Later, he urges Ern to get his shit together because Lottie needs him. So there's more to Alfred than meets the eye. Though on its surface, the show is mostly about Alfred's come up from a neighborhood SoundCloud rapper to someone that helps his family and friends make some stability for themselves, his music plays a very small part in the show and in his character overall. Most of his career and creative growth happens off screen. There's a reason that we've never really seen him perform, and it's not just because Tyree Henry can't rap, even though I'm pretty sure he's actually gotten better, and in season 4 he does a pretty decent job. It's because that's not really what his character is about. He's like an onion, because onions have layers, and Alfred has layers. You get it. Alfred becomes visibly softer throughout the seasons in a good way, in a great way. In fact, because of this change, I completely forgot that he technically killed someone in season 1 over a driver's side mirror. He made me forget that he killed someone. That's growth. In the first episode, Van is established within the context of her complicated relationship with Earn. She's characterized as dependable, which is evidenced by the fact that Earn immediately called her from jail, not his parents, and not Al. She's got a decent job, she can pay her own bills, has her own car, etc. This characterization quickly changes when she's fired from her teaching job and doesn't find a new dependable job for the rest of the series, essentially, which is something I think needed to happen in order for Van's character to develop. When was there time for her to care for herself in that first part of season 1? In fact, after her first bout with self-care, she gets fired. When you take care of other people, you do a lot of pretending so that people you're caring for don't worry. So her switch in season 3 and the Terrari episode seemed right on time to me. I think she's still figuring it out and very much is in flux, and that's okay. That's a far stretch from the Van that we got to know in season 1 that appeared to have it all together while she was really self-destructing on the inside, constantly feeling that despite all of her work, she wasn't getting what she wanted. Van's journey is one more complex than it seems on the surface. In season 1, she talked about her desire to be seen as more than Lottie's mom, more than Ern's baby mother, but she doesn't really know what else she wants to be seen as or what she can do for others to see her differently, which kind of makes it difficult for others to take her serious until Terrari, until things have boiled over and gone too far. On top of that, to get political on you for a minute, just a minute, it's still seen as kind of bizarre when a woman wants to be seen as more than a wife and a mother. I don't want to get married. I don't want to have kids. People hate that about me. After Van gets fired, she quite literally never talks about teaching again. So that likely wasn't her passion to begin with. It was probably more of a security blanket. Van is the most lost out of all the 3 other characters on the show, despite how she's portrayed at the beginning. This man Darius is the steady hand of the show, in my opinion. Someone left a comment on a previous video of mine saying that Darius is so easygoing because he chose not to fight the unpredictability of the city. He just goes with the flow, which is a good inference to make. In the first episode, Darius hops out of the car with Ern and Alfred. While Al is hopping out to make some shit shake, and Ern is hopping out to calm him down and then later back him up, Darius is a spectator. Darius just wanted to see what would happen next. I could take this even further and say that Darius is a manifestation or personification of the surrealism of the city. He makes the vibe of the show, especially in these more intense moments, by maintaining a chill vibe and a calm voice, but at the same time not necessarily being the voice of reason. So he kind of stirs the pot a little bit, but does it in a calm voice, and I like it. The Teddy Perkins episode is the only one where he really seems afraid. Additionally, it seemed to be one of those rare moments where Darius didn't know how to navigate through the city's chaos. Alfred tells him to get the piano and go. Benny tells him to get the shotgun to defend himself and go. He doesn't listen to anyone because he usually knows more about how to get out of these more magical dilemmas, but not that time. In spite of the Teddy Perkins episode, Darius's character remains largely unchanged and always exists as this constant for us to compare other things to. Like I mentioned before, the show ends with a huge cliffhanger. You don't know whether or not the city and characters that we've gotten to know are a product of Darius's weed and sensory deprivation chamber combination, or if they are real within the universe. Was it all a dream? I don't think it matters. What I do think is important is this red herring the show presented with Ern waking up every season. In this short I posted after season 3 came out, I talk about why this is placed at the beginning of each season since it never seems relevant to the rest. After seeing the end of season 4, I think it's safe to say that we were all being misled. We were tricked, we were duped. We were made to think that certain events were just happening in Ern's head when really it might be in Darius's head. I want to talk about the work ethic episode really quick because I have a Tyler Perry video coming kind of soon. I love this episode because as a creative, you know that things take time. They do if you actually care about them and give a shit about them and want them to be good. If you're working on 30 projects at once, none of them will be good. I said what I said. I don't care how many resources you have. I don't care what your work ethic is like. It's impossible. Think about the Cheesecake Factory. I know y'all probably love the Cheesecake Factory, but is it actually good? No, it's not. because the menu's too big. Okay, let's move on. So to see a showrunner who put so much effort into his show commenting on the drivel that comes out of Tyler Perry's studio sometimes was perfect. But it also touches a bit on why Tyler Perry sort of can't stop his content train. The last time I checked, he had nearly 400 people working at his studios, and several other shows are filmed on his studio campus because of how easy it is to film in Georgia. If he turned around and decided to stop making films and TV shows, or to even slow down, he'd be putting hundreds of people out of work. The happy medium to that is to scout and hire the appropriate talent, which I honestly don't yet know if Tyler Perry has done, or even, no shade, has the patience for. This Tyler Perry commentary is another factor that brings the show even closer to the Boondocks to me. And those comparisons began with season 1, episode 2. So for me, it's interesting to see that they're still sort of taking inspiration from the Boondocks and reinventing some concepts that the Boondocks started all the way in season 4. If you didn't know, showrunner and creator Donald Glover is a purveyor of internet culture and has been for much of his career. He's constantly embracing the way that the internet can disseminate information in different ways and how it's a venue fit for all kinds of content creation. We saw this with the Because the Internet Project, the Pharaoh's concert series, his last album release, etc. So it's no surprise that Atlanta uses the show's tendency to dwell in the bizarre to really embrace internet and meme culture. My favorite part about this show is how it uses internet culture in a way that will ensure its longevity. And I know I didn't explain that well. I know I didn't. So here's what I mean. From previous season, there was Florida Man and Lakeith Stanfield's subsequent tweet about Florida Man. There was the Invisible Car. There's the Kevin Samuels cameo. When Ibra Ake put out this statement last year, I wasn't sure if it was a red herring or a legitimate plea for the Atlanta fan base to stop overanalyzing the show for the love of God. But I really and firmly believe that this show wants to be analyzed, and I don't care what he has to say about it. He can fight me. The best example of this, I think, is the goof who sat by the door. I'm sure you have all seen the connection between this episode and the video essay on YouTube. Rather than being just an analysis of the Goofy movie like the video essay, it creates an entire world of circumstances for this mostly overlooked film. Circumstances that will no doubt be brought up whenever the movie or video essay is discussed in the future. So all future conversations about a Goofy movie will also be about Atlanta. Also, if the show is just a vibe, why would it use an in-depth analysis of a kid's show as a springboard for one of its most creative episodes? I don't think I've ever been more satisfied with the series finale. Even though it ends on a suspenseful moment, it's comfortable, and it also really doesn't matter what the real answer is, like I said before. Donald Glover has said on numerous occasions that he works to create projects that function as an entire experience. What mattered most to me was the absolute roller coaster and experience that was watching this show. When you start a new season of Atlanta, you don't know what you're going to get. Sometimes you're literally watching a different show when you turn Atlanta on, but Atlanta will always make you feel a certain way when you watch it. It'll always catch you off guard, but only in an Atlanta-ish way, if that makes sense. So essentially, the real Atlanta was the friends we made along the way. I'm really curious about what other kinds of art this show will inspire in the future. If you didn't know, there's an independent series on YouTube called Plugs that's inspired by Atlanta. That's pretty good. But other than that, I don't know much about other projects that stand on Atlanta's shoulders. But I think that Atlanta came right on time. I feel like the world is really embracing these weirder, more abstract shows, and I'm really glad that Atlanta is appealing, not only to people, that were a fan of Donald Glover before, but to mainstream culture. I'm a master's student in a fine arts program, and I've attended several publishing panels, screenwriting panels, and Atlanta is brought up every time. Not only just because it's a good show, but because in the creative world right now, or at least in the circles that I'm in, it's like the pillar of creativity. No one is thinking outside of the box and putting it on paper and then putting it on screen like Atlanta. And I don't know if any other show will ever do it again, but I'm glad that Atlanta did it and that I can go back and rewatch it and take something different from it every time.